Well, thank you very much, Michael, for coming tonight.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
And just explain to the audience, on the way here in the car, you were quite confused about why Australians do Christmas in July.
Yeah.
So, have you worked it out?
Yeah, no, I've now picked it up from the introduction, but obviously been raised in a very hot climate for most of my childhood. And one of my first Christmas memories, actually, I'll never forget, in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, around Christmas time, one of the first cartoons that ever made me laugh out loud. There was a picture of a Christmas tree, and there was a couple dressed in traditional Arabic dress. The father's looking very confused. There's a boy bawling his eyes out, totally distraught. There's a red Rolls Royce behind it with a big bow on the top, and the mother's looking to the father and saying, "Oh, for goodness sake, take it back and get him a blue one." And I can remember that. It's stuck in my mind ever since I saw it.
Do you grew up in the Middle East as a child, so do you have any other striking memories besides that cartoon?
I quite enjoyed growing up in that part of the world. I was always very tall, and I know that might sound like a strange thing to say, but before driving rules were more, if you like, sort of formalized, you're allowed to drive once you could see over the top of the wheel. For me, that's when I was 7.5. And I'm now 6'4". I stopped growing when I was 12. So that's a very strong memory from that part of the world. And I think also, things have changed now. Now, sadly, often in that part of the world, there's an awful lot of quite bitter politics going on. But certainly, in the late 70s, early 80s, there were pockets which were very different. And you would go out into the desert, and you would have these races with various different types of Bedouin on either camels or on foot or what have you. And so it was very much part of my sort of upbringing, my memory.
Okay. Yeah. And in adult life, you were working for the Lord Chancellor's Department in the UK. Can you tell us what that involved, or do you have to kill us? Or?
No, not at all. It wasn't. I was involved in investing money in the stock market. The department's called something different now, but the Lord Chancellor's department at that point was the trustee of last resort, and I wanted to go into a law career. And I thought I might do some time working in the Lord Chancellor's department, to see the working in the legal system. That was my plan. I had to do some civil service exams before I went, and they then said, "Would you like to work in a totally different division, investing money?" And I said, "No." And I said, "How long would it take you to find me an opening somewhere else?" And they said, 6 months. And at this point, I hadn't told them I was only thinking of working with them for 1 or 2 years before going to do a law degree. And I was thinking, that's an awfully lot. So I just agreed, and I said, okay, fine. I'll go and work for this place. And actually really enjoyed it. I found that whole world fascinating and intriguing. But that's what took me there initially.
Okay.
And I was just interested in that. And I'd come back to the UK, and many of you will be listening to me now as well. This happens to me a lot when I'm in the UK. People listen to my English accent. And even when I speak in England, people come to me and they say, "What part of England are you from?" And I'll say, "This is the voice of the BBC World Service." And this is the accent I picked up from the World Service in the Middle East. So,
Now, you have had some varied audiences that you've spoken to.
Yeah.
What's been one of the most interesting for you?
Oh, wow. I love audiences where I get to hear a lot of different type of questions. And so right now, I do find it fascinating. When I have the opportunity, I'll sometimes be invited to speak with to maybe the cabinet of a country in a closed setting, where they can ask questions. You'll be allowed to ask questions today relatively anonymously, but there are some people who are very nervous about asking any questions at all, or if the question's asked, it doesn't want to be traced to them. And I find that fascinating right now, because the culture's shifting so fast at the moment in the world. A lot of people honestly feel that they're in a headspin. So sometimes some of the smaller settings are very intriguing, because it allows you to deal with a set of questions. And I think what I've begun to discover is people are wrestling with questions at a whole new level. They're just not sure where they can go to look at them in a deeper way. Okay. And that's one of the things that I just love doing. I really enjoy that. So that's a lot of fun. Talking with teenagers are great because you get a lot of instant, very honest feedback. So it's very obvious to tell if they like what you're saying or not. I can remember once speaking at a large youth gathering, and we had about 200 people on the first day and 2,500 by the third day. They just kept bringing their friends. And what I was doing was giving a short 15-minute talk and doing 2 hours of questions. And what was interesting was literally, I got them to write the questions on a piece of card, walk up to the front, put it at just at the bottom where I was speaking, and then leave. And you can imagine 5,000-6,000 questions on pieces of, you get a big mountain. And I'll never forget one teenager, he came up with his question wrapped around a chocolate bar with a tag hanging off it saying, "Pick me." And I remember picking it up saying, "Kids, I want you to know that this is a blatant attempt to try to draw my attention to this question and make me do it, and I want you to know it's definitely going to work." And so it's the variety of it that's often a lot of sense. In the corporate setting, I think, the subject matter we have today, who would have guessed that the word integrity would have become one of the biggest buzzwords as we went into the 21st century, and it most certainly is. But we haven't been asking those questions for a while, and so we've forgotten not simply what the answers are, we've sometimes even forgotten what the question's meant to be. So it's very hard to come up with a good answer if you're not even sure what the question is. And so sometimes working in that setting too. So but I enjoy the variety, the cultural variety in the different settings are great.
Okay. And I think when we worked out you were going to come and speak on integrity, half the things that have happened in Australia for us hadn't occurred yet. So let's hope there's no causal effect between me coming and all this other. That would be disappointing. Yeah, well, don't let anyone know that. What about? Can you tell us look? You're called a Christian apologist. What are you actually apologising for about Christianity?
Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian culture. I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I met a group of people who were happy to take any question I had. And I went through a period where I asked 6 months and months and months, 6-9 months. I was asking questions all the time to these guys. And they gave me a lot of space. And they were very, very kind. And it allowed me to process things through. And then, for me, when I sort of came to the conclusion and thought, gosh, the Christian faith is true and real, it was actually quite a sad day for me because I realized I didn't want it to be.
Because?
Well, I still wasn't sure if I trusted Christians, and I was very happy with my life. And I don't want to upset anyone here. I was raised in a culture where pursuit of money was the number one thing. So at that age, at that time, I felt about Christians the same way I felt about communists, that they had nothing, but they wanted to share it with me. And I was absolutely sure that if it was true, it was going to ruin my life. That makes sense. And I really wrestled with it because of that. But after I became a Christian, far from ruining my life, it brought a completion. I can remember thinking, a group of people were incredibly polite and gave me a huge amount of time over a very long period of time to ask every single question, objection, issue, well, what about this? And what do you think about that? And what do you make of this? And explain this and tell me about that. And I can remember after that, when I look back, one of my first thoughts was, I'd love to give people the same opportunity that someone gave me, to ask all those questions. And it's something I've really come to love and enjoy. And so that's what apologetics in that sense is. There are a lot of questions that we have, and the question is, are there any meaningful answers to them? And the word apologetics is one of the words which is used in the Bible to describe the process of trying to give an answer to those difficult questions.
Okay. Yeah. Now, because you move globally and speak in different countries and so on, is there any disturbing or worrying trends for you that you can see happening around the world? Apart from the ones that we're all thinking about.
Well, so apart from the integrity issue, and we don't have time to go into all of this now,
or just one.
Our culture, actually it's happening quite globally. We're rushing into something called victim culture right now. And I don't have time to unpack it all, but we used to think about cultures as either being driven by honor, and how do we act with honor, or possibly with dignity, how do we conduct ourselves with dignity. In a victim-based culture, you get status by being a victim, which means that at the moment we increasingly live in a culture where we want to hang on to our historical or present grievances and use them to get status and power over other people. So if you want just one illustration of how much the culture has shifted, I don't know in this audience how many of you are willing to admit to watching the original Superman movie in the early 1980s. Has any of you seen that? Okay, so this is just one illustration to show. If you think about it, in the early 1980s, what were Superman's weaknesses? Apart from kryptonite, what weakness did he have? And the answer is none. Physically perfect, rationally perfect, mentally perfect, morally perfect. As a matter of fact, reminds me of me in so many ways.
6'4"?
I mean, gentle, kind, understanding. Do you know what I sense? I mean, he was perfect. And that was a superhero. Does that make sense? That's why he was a hero. Well, there was a millennial remake of Superman in 2016 called Man of Steel. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, but how does that movie start? Well, Superman is on a boat surrounded by a thick fog. He feels cosmically lonely, cosmically abandoned, misunderstood, misrepresented. He doesn't know who he is. He can't deal with the expectation. He's angry, he's upset, and he feels lost. In other words, to be a superhero today, Superman needs a victim narrative. So if any of you or your kids are watching Marvel movies right now, the one thing you'll notice with all of the superhero movies is every superhero has a victim narrative. They've all been used, abused. And so because of that, we have inadvertently presented that as here's the way to be respected and admired by everybody. Does that make sense? Now, the problem with it then is you get locked into a culture of competitive victimhood. And you end up with a vortex of grievance, where everyone's looking for either current or historical grievances, escalating them, and you get this increasing politics of anger, which you seem to see almost all over the world. The thing that surprised me is I originally saw this as a Western phenomena, and it was a huge, very interesting for me when I was over in parts of Asia, all the way from China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, everywhere I went. When they heard about this, they said, can you talk about that? That's the number one issue in our country. And so it's not a Western issue, it's become and I do find that concerning, because it means that there are no statespeople anymore speaking, doesn't mean trying to bring a bigger picture to our disputes. Everything gets intensified and very hot, and that tends to make things feel more fractious within most countries I go to. So
I can see a film festival with Michael Ramsden speaking to it. It's our next event.
Yeah. By the way, I hope all of you who've been watching these films feel ashamed about it. So it's a waste of time. I only watch these movies because I do a lot of cultural analysis and research, and so I'm forced to watch them. Otherwise I wouldn't do it.
You may know that we've had a royal commission into the 4 big banks here.
Yeah.
And not only is it been, there's possible jail terms been talked about as well as fines. And I was just thinking in this room, we could have some budding CEOs of those banks in 2 more decades. Let's say you could assemble them together and give them a piece of advice on the basis of what's happened.
Well, one of the last times I was in Australia, I got to speak to some of those banks. As a matter of fact, I got invited to spend an evening with one of the boards of one of those banks. And that was a fascinating conversation. It was meant to be a 1-hour conversation, and it went on for 4.5 hours. What was interesting for me was at the end, the chairman of the board of the bank said, in 37 years, this could possibly be the single most important conversation we've ever had. But I think that comes back to one of the things we were saying earlier, which is we have a lot of unanswered questions in our culture, and we don't know where to go to think about it more deeply in a bigger way. And again, as a culture, for a short time I used to teach business ethics. I used to get invited sometimes to teach it at Oxford because there was no one else who wanted to teach it because everyone thought it was such a boring area. And I could remember I'd be flying around the world sometimes and people say, what do you do? And if I ever mentioned I was interested in business ethics, the guy in the seat next to me or whoever it be will go, what a waste of time. I mean, literally, that's what would be said. So at every business school in the world, we removed ethics. We taught everybody that ethics was relative and there were no such things as moral standards. And then everyone got very angry when bankers acted in that way. So to some extent, we've reaped partly what we've sown. So if you are a young CEO or you're looking into that, hopefully what will come through this evening is this area could be way more important than you actually think. We tend to feel regret when we get caught, but many of us hope that we'll never get caught and that will deal with the problem. And so what we actually need to understand is the dynamic of why is it that it is so serious when that actually collapses in a society. It's one of the things that's feeding some of the political anger right now is people's feeling there's a lot of injustice, nothing's done about it, everyone's trying to get away with it. What will happen? But at the same time, we have to ask the other question on the other side, which is then how do you bring reconciliation into a society? So we love it when we see other people at fault. The harder ethical questions are times if we're willing to ever look in here and say, well, what am I actually like on the inside as well? And that's, we need sometimes to recover that sense of humility and then also figure out not only how do we build a path for justice, which is very important, but how do we also build one for peace, and that also draws people together.
Okay. Well, I can see that the Christmas dinner's coming out. So
I know.
This is a very quick question for you. We're doing Would I Lie to You tonight, which is completely unethical given that you're supposed to be speaking on integrity. But can you tell us a very brief story now of a Christmas, an unbelievable Christmas of yours, and then we're going to have to work out over the night whether it's true or a lie, whether it's truth or a lie.
Okay. Well, during one Christmas, shortly after we'd moved from Saudi Arabia to Cyprus, I took my brother, who's a year younger than me, for a spin in our car. And that's the time it rains. It's normally very dry. And we came to what would have been a dry riverbed, and it was filled with water. And my brother said, "Do you think you can drive through that?" And I was like, yeah, sure, that's fine. And we went through the water halfway up the other side, lost some traction, and ended up with one wheel in the water that kept spinning. And the car sank. Obviously, it wasn't my fault. A guy came up by with a four-wheel drive and offered to tow us out, and instead of drawing us straight, pulled us off the rock that we'd come to rest on into the water. And as the car sank in, I did turn the windscreen wipers on, which was interesting, and I saw my father come round the top of the hill to see his car, which was 4 months old, slowly disappearing down into the water as we went down.
Very naughty boy, weren't you?
Yeah, that's right. Well, you don't know if it's true yet. I could have made all of that.
That's true. Okay, all right. Well, we'll be coming back to this later. Michael will be speaking to us after we've had dinner. Thanks.
Right, thank you.
Thanks for your time.